Weekly interviews with Joe Horgan and Otto Tobuns. Love DNVCM and welcome back to a very special episode of Latvia Weekly. I am Joe Horgan, and for those of you who are watching the Facebook Live version of this episode, we were having a few technical difficulties that we have now worked out, but I am here today with my colleagues from the Tava Klase program. So for those of you who have listened to the show before, you know that I was involved in this program by the Latvian Ministry of Education to teach these online lessons in this time of pandemic so that the kind of kids throughout Latvia would be able to continue studying in a kind of a more interesting way and also in a way that would allow primary school teachers and also teachers getting students ready for the exam to get a little bit of relief. So I am here with four of my colleagues who took part in this program, and that is Daira. So Daira, can you say hello to everyone?
Yes, Labdian. Hello, everybody.
I'm also here with Ingrida. Ingrida, how are you?
I'm doing well.
Excellent. Lauren, how are you?
I'm well. Thanks for having me.
And finally, Monika, how are you?
I'm great. Happy to be here.
Excellent. And so basically, the story behind this little episode is that when I first came to this Tava Klase program, so I was asked to do it by my vice principal at the school that I teach at Jelgava Spirola State Gymnasium. I was struck right away by how I was not the only American as I usually tend to be in most places I go in Latvia. I was surrounded by a bunch of other Americans, and I thought that it would be very interesting to kind of hear how my colleagues ended up going from being born in the USA like me to here on Latvia National TV teaching English lessons. So I want to hear a little bit about everyone's stories, and then we, for those of you who are watching the Facebook Live version of this, we can take some questions also, and we're also going to talk a little bit about just our experience in this program in general. So I'm going to start with Daira, who was the first person I kind of talked into this, and I'm very glad that you agreed. So Daira, how did you go from being born in America to ending up here on national television in Latvia?
Right. Thanks for having me today, Joe. And hello to all of my colleagues. Good to see you all. I was born in 1973 to my parents who were refugees from Latvia, my parents and grandparents. So my parents were actually born in Latvia. My father was from Tukums and my mother was from Iecava. Of course, they were very, very small when they left Latvia and went on such tremendous journeys to eventually make it to Canada, where they met each other and then established their family in America and the United States. Growing up, so I attended the Latvian camps, and we spoke Latvian in the home. And eventually, I found my way to a master's degree in linguistics much further down the road, and theoretical linguistics. And shortly after that, I was offered my first opportunity, and it was a teaching opportunity, despite not having really any formal pedagogical training. And so I spent 8.5 years working as an adjunct associate professor at a community college, where I actually got to, in a sense, give back and work with especially the refugee population of Lansing, Michigan, teaching English. I also taught developmental reading and writing to native speakers of English. And then I found out about a program called ESPM Amisija. I read an account from another Westerner, as I kind of refer to us, who had gone through the program, and she wrote about her experiences teaching in Latvia and having come back to Latvia. Also, I kind of refer to it as a returning. And she wrote about it so positively, and it really left a huge impact on me. And I was at a place in my career where I just felt like I was a bit of a hamster or a squirrel running through a wheel. And I thought I would apply. Beyond that, I had always been really looking for an opportunity to spend time in Latvia and to introduce Latvia to my child, because we both have dual citizenship, and I tried to raise her as best that I knew how, speaking Latvian and celebrating Jāņi and going to Latvian festivities. So I wanted her to know, well, if you have this citizenship, this other citizenship as well, you also have a responsibility to know what it means, what that really means on a larger scale. So when this opportunity presented itself, I took it, and I was glad to do so. So through SBMA Missia, I was coordinated. I was found a school. I also received lots of really extensive training in methodologies and communication and psychology and classroom management and things that I hadn't really formally ever experienced. I had just kind of worked my way through it as an associate professor. So and that's where it brought me. So I've been teaching English in Ropaži, outside of Riga, Ropažova Vidskola, for 3 years now, and through SBMA Misija and through also my colleagues at school, I learned of the opportunity to join and be a part of Tava Klase, and so I was always looking for new challenges and new ways to grow, and so then I said yes.
Awesome. And maybe now we can go to Monika, because from what I understand, Daira was the reason why Monika got involved in this in the first place. So I think that we can naturally move over to Monika and hear how her story is similar or different to Daira's.
Hi, yes. Well, actually, my story of getting involved is funny. It's actually a coincidence that Daira was involved. I was walking down the street outside my house one day, and my former Latvian professor from the US stopped me randomly in the street and asked me if I wanted to teach. And so that's how I ended up being involved. And then, of course, Daira ended up leading it. And I said, well, that's even better. So why not? But my story begins similarly to Daira's, except my mom was born in a refugee camp in Germany after World War II. So her parents were the ones who left Latvia, and then my father's American, and I was born outside of Seattle, Washington. And same story, sort of, I went to Latvian camps, Latvian Saturday school, Latvian folk dancing, all that good stuff. And I visited Latvia for the first time in 1995, and then 1997, and then 10 years later, after I finished my bachelor's degree in linguistics and political science, my friend and schoolmate, Dr. Laura Dean, now doctor, shout out to Laura. She was the one who recommended the American Latvian Youth Association scholarship to work at the Occupation Museum. And so I went, did that in 2007 during the summer, came home, really wanted to go back. And Laura suggested applying for a position at the Baltic Times, which at the time was the only really the only English language newspaper coming out of the 3 Baltic states. And so that was a fantastic opportunity. And I did that for a few years. And then I went back home and did a master's degree in international relations. And now flash forward a bit, I applied for a Fulbright scholarship to Latvia as well, to work at the NATO Strategic Communications Center of Excellence, to look at disinformation and also do work with media literacy education and all kinds of exciting stuff like that. And yeah, so that brings me here. I also taught English when I lived in Latvia before, and definitely a linguistics background helps a lot. And yeah, that's my story.
So then that's pretty cool, and I have a lot of respect for you that you would jump into this after doing so many other different things like that. So we'll come back to you in a minute, Monika. I want to hear from Lauren. So Lauren, I guess you also had a bit of a connection with Monika and Daira as well, getting involved in Tava Klase, if I remember correctly. So how did you end up here in this program?
Yeah, so my path here, I grew up in the Chicago area in the United States. I do not have a Latvian background. I did my undergraduate degree in Spanish, actually, and then went on to get my master's in second language acquisition and have been teaching for, I think, the past 14 years, either Spanish or English as a second language in the United States, and was looking for a new career challenge and joined a program similar to the Fulbright program, but a little bit different. It's the English Language Fellow program. So they find teachers in English teachers and send them all over the world. And once you sign up for the program, they can place you in any country where they're running a program. And you have a chance to say, yes, you're interested, or no, you're not. And, it's a huge variety of programs all around the world. So they offered Riga, and I felt like I completely hit the jackpot. It wasn't a place I knew very much about before receiving that offer, so I did some research quick and could not believe how lucky I was to be placed in a location that seemed like just a really great place to live. And I'm here with my whole family and have really just loved being here, met so many interesting people, have learned so much. And then with the school closures and everything that happened with COVID, my job was put on hold. And at that time, Monika reached out. We knew each other because we were both here on behalf of the embassy. So they had introduced us, and she told me about the Tava Klase project. So the rest is history.
Cool. And finally, Ingrida, who has been waiting now, I would love to hear your story. So how did you end up in Tava Klase from your journey from America?
Yeah, so I'm from outside of the San Francisco, California area. I was also born in a very Latvian family. All four of my grandparents were born in Latvia, and they left during World War II. And my parents actually met at a Latvian song and dance festival. So they just thought that keeping the culture in our family was very important. So the Latvian language was actually the first language that I learned. And we also did the Latvian camps, Latvian Saturday school. But only in high school I started understanding how important the culture was. And through the Latvian camp is how I actually started teaching. I was teaching Latvian folk dancing. I was participating in Latvian choirs. I actually led the San Francisco folk dancing group for a couple of years and helped lead the San Jose Song Festival in 2015. And then I went on to I got 2 bachelors in education, music education and general education in California. And once I finished that, I wasn't sure how I wanted to continue. I didn't really want to go into a school in California. And the opportunity arose to study my master's here in Latvia. So last year I got my master's in education sciences, and I've been working on applying that to different job areas. And at the beginning of the Tava Klase program, Monika mentioned Tava Klase to me, and I told her I was interested. And the next day I started planning my first lesson. Kind of a quick recap.
Yeah, so it seems like with just about all of us, we are very easy people to talk into things, because my story is somewhat similar to yours, at least at the last part. I also just kind of went, yeah, sure, okay, no problem. But for those of you who haven't heard my not incredibly interesting story before, basically I grew up in Portland, Maine, which is a kind of a small city up in the northeast of the United States, in a state that's about the size of Latvia. I didn't have any family connection to Latvia whatsoever. My mom's family was Finnish. My dad is from Ireland, and at the end of university, I wanted to go teaching somewhere in the world, so I did the Fulbright program. I chose to go to Latvia. Well, they chose me. I was very lucky that they chose me, because it was pretty competitive that year. I still have no idea why they chose me, but I'm glad that they did. And it was supposed to only be a 1-year program, but I loved it so much here that this is now my 7th or 8th year. I'm not entirely sure now anymore. But yeah, it's interesting that all of us have kind of different ways that we got here, and then very similar ways how we joined this particular project. But I want to hear a little bit about your experience with the project in general. So all of you basically immediately agreed, said, yeah, no problem, we'll do this. But then once you finally got in front of the camera, like I did, what was that feeling? How did you feel? Was there any nerves at all? I know some people were absolutely terrified when they first did it. For me, it wasn't quite so bad because I've done, this podcast for quite some time already, and I, did some radio in my past. But what was your feeling? Maybe we can start with Ingrida this time. How did you feel when you first went in front of the camera?
My first experience the first day of filming was very nerve-wracking. I didn't know what to expect. I felt unprepared. I just kind of felt thrown into it. But in the end, after the first 2 minutes, I started feeling very comfortable and I was able to get through everything.
Mm-hmm.
And I didn't have to tape anything on the first day, so that's always great.
Oh, that's good too. Yeah. What about for you, Lauren? How did you feel when you first went in front of the camera?
I think the first day I was just giddy to be out of the house because that was right when everything shut down. So I wasn't even really focused on what I had to do. I was just like, yes, I get to go somewhere. And then I remember Monika had already done some filming, I think, and we started and she explained that you can't really stop and there wouldn't be any redos or we weren't going to really rehearse. It was just one take, get ready, go. And I guess I didn't really even have time to think about it or get nervous about that. And suddenly we were filming. So yeah. It was an adventure.
So Monika, what about you? Because you were one of the first people, I think, to start filming lessons. And you had quite a few lessons to film. So how was that feeling?
It was interesting, I think, because, as teachers, we usually don't ever have the experience of having invisible students. So not being able to gauge the reaction from your students, are they getting it? Is it too fast? Is it boring? Are they excited? So the first day I was with a co-teacher, Irina from Ventspils, and, I don't know if we were nervous, but we were trying to script it out word for word, thinking we had to have exactly, 15 minutes of content. And then I think after the first kind of episode, we were like, oh, okay, no. And also we know what we're doing. We know what we're talking about. So we'd start writing on the whiteboard, the main highlights to not forget and things like that. And then, I think the max we did in one day, we filmed 12 episodes in one day. Oh. And it didn't take that long though, because it was towards the end of our time. And it flowed really well. And it just kind of went, your brain just shuts off that uncertainty and just goes like survival mode. It's like teacher mode, go, can't fail, no stopping. And then it just kind of happened.
Yeah. Just by the way, for people who aren't familiar with the program, these lessons are 18. Well, they're supposed to be 18 minutes long. I was always yelled at by my producers that I was going a little bit too long, or a tiny bit too short. So I was trying to time it for 18 minutes. At least it was supposed to be, because otherwise they had to do extra work editing me. 12 lessons in one day is not as extreme as if you have 12 40-minute lessons, as the Latvian education system usually is. But at the same time, it does take kind of a different level of concentration, because you can't kind of stop, grab some coffee as students are, writing something or anything like that. Daira, what was it like for you at the beginning? What was your kind of initial feelings? What were your initial feelings when you started out?
I think very similar to what both you and Monika said. The timing was something that I'm not good at anyhow in a 40-minute class, even with students. So to have to be very precisely 18 minutes and 30 seconds without going over or under, that was a big pressure I found, and one where I had a difficult time adjusting, because sometimes I would find myself speaking too much about something, and then there would not be time later to speak about something else. And then, as Monika mentioned, not being able to get feedback. So kind of that's something very important. Teaching is a very interactive activity. And so to just speak in a camera, not sure if you should be saying more, explaining it a different way, or even waiting and giving them enough time, the students, to complete something, that was also a bit challenging. I did want to say that we had a really powerful English language group for grades 1 through 6. These lovely ladies that are with us today, as well as two who are not with us today, because they were not they're not here today to speak because they were not born and raised in America. So, but we had Irina Matveyeva, who teaches at Ventspils Sesta Vidusskola, and then we also had Elina Ozolina, who's a direktora vietniece izglītības jomā at Laurenču Sākuma skola. And I think that for me, maybe that was the largest thing that I can take away from this experience is just really what a great team we had. And it really helped me also the first time we came together. We all came together and filmed the same weekend. So we weren't with strangers. And some of the crew even said to me, really, you don't know each other? This is the first time you're meeting some of these people in person. You act like you've known each other for a really long time. We're like you're good friends and colleagues. And we really, I felt, worked well together. And I'm very appreciative for that.
Yeah, Daira and I had never met. We did meet briefly in real life, thanks to Tava Klase, because we just kind of happened to be there at the same time. But we actually, I can kind of call you my Corona buddy, because I met you because you were one of the only people I was trying to throw together this online seminar at the very beginning of this crisis to try to help primary school, or sorry, grades 1 through 6 teachers kind of have some ideas on what to do. And Daira was, I called something like 20 different people, people that were, suggested to me, and you were the only person who agreed initially. And then, but by now I feel like I've known you for years already. So I definitely have that feeling. Yeah. And, I can also mention that I had an awesome team here in Jelgava as well. My colleagues are Liitma Tirumniece, who is something like my Latvian mother. She was the first person in Latvia I met who picked me up from the airport when I first came here, something like 7 years ago. So she was teaching some of the 9th grade lessons and helping me with my lessons. And then also Agita Olzolinia, who is from our rival school, Jelgava State Gymnasium, but we are good friends with as well. So she was also teaching some of the 9th grade lessons and helping us as well. So whenever you put yourself out in person, so with teaching is the kind of job where you are putting yourself in front of a class, you are putting yourself in front of parents as well. That's always a bit nerve-wracking, and you will have to have thick skin. Now, putting yourself on national TV in front of hundreds of thousands of people who were apparently watching, because we kept getting these statistics in our WhatsApp group chat that we're all members of, that we had 50 countries watching today. We had 300,000 people, or I don't know what the exact numbers were. We'll find all that out pretty soon. Obviously, there's going to be people who like what we do. There's going to be criticism as well. But what was the general feedback that you guys heard from either your different students who watched or colleagues? Were people generally supportive? Did people give constructive feedback? Because there is a certain kind of person who lives at the comment section of websites like Delphi and TVNet who always like to complain about everything. But what was your experience kind of with this, and were people generally pretty supportive? Maybe we can start with Daira this time.
All right. I found that amongst my colleagues, people tended to be quite supportive of this very unique circumstance. And quite frankly, something like this hadn't been done before, and it wasn't expected. It was something that, just kind of came out of the blue, and we all rolled with it. So amongst people who were in the trenches with us, so to speak, I felt that there was really a good solidarity and kind of like appreciation for what we were doing. At the same time, I did hear a little bit of criticism, especially directed towards the foreign language program, and that's that some students or some parents of students felt that they needed to advocate on behalf of their children or their child because they weren't appreciative of the lessons happening all in English. And so I did have some discussions with some parents and also some members of the press who contacted me personally by telephone and by email. And I wasn't sure how to accept that. I mean, I certainly understood how frustrating it can be if you're a young child and you're watching and you feel like you're not getting, or you're not able to learn along with the program that is being offered for you or the lesson. But I think that's where parental involvement also really comes into play, whereas it's really important that we support our children in all their learning adventures. And when you're learning a foreign language, for me, when I was considering what we were doing, I thought this was such an amazing opportunity really for students in Latvia to hear native speakers of English speak and teach and have the natural language and have the ability to hear that, where I don't think you can really find that much any place in Latvia. If you go around, you might see a few store shop signs in English, but really you don't get the opportunity to hear it and to hear it spoken naturally and to be a part of that. So it was like the opportunity I felt for students to travel to another country without having to leave their living rooms in the time of the pandemic. So it was an opportunity that I felt was very unique, and I was glad that we could bring it to them. Some people didn't agree with that assessment, but I think one of the first things that we learn when we're learning to be teachers to people is I think the first rule is that you don't let on that you speak the language of your students, even if you do speak it, because if students know that you can speak their language, then oftentimes they're more apt to wait for you to translate and to explain in the language that they're more comfortable within, which is a completely natural human thing, a characteristic, but really just to give them that authentic learning experience so that they're immersed in the language. That's what we were really trying to do.
Yeah, that's interesting because I also teach at the University of Latvia at the Faculty of Education, and I teach a course on English methodology. And this is one of the central, questions that we grapple with is, how much, do you teach only in the target language, or do you use a mix, or and this is something that I would love to talk about for about an hour or so. It's a very complicated issue, and I see both sides of it, and something I go back and forth on quite a bit. But unfortunately, this is not, or fortunately for most of our listeners, this is not a pedagogy podcast. But I'd love to discuss that a bit more. But definitely, there is that kind of conflict within the world of teaching. And especially with how parents feel. Monika, I would love to hear from you. So what was your general reaction from colleagues, from students, from parents, if they somehow found your contact information? What was your experience?
So overall, it was good. And I think because I'd never done something so public before, I kind of was looking for comments, criticism, good things, bad things. And I think the feedback was kind of twofold. I think in the beginning, like Daira was saying, a lot of students are not used to that immersive environment. And so, having, potentially tens of thousands of kids watching, they're not all going to be at the same level. Some of them maybe lived in the UK for a couple of years and speak English basically fluently. Some maybe have never had an immersive experience like this or had access to native English speakers. And so, there was feedback that it was too slow, or that it was way too fast, or that we introduced too many words, or it was so dumbed down that why would they watch, kids already know all these words. So because having that balance, I was like, all right, so if we're somewhere in the middle, that would be great. So, because it was all in English, I tried to address it, sort of have material that if you only got the 5 main vocab words out of the lesson, awesome. If you got all of our, jokes and explanations, even better, so we tried to sort of have different levels within one level, so to speak. And then, the question with immersion, like Daira and Ingrida and myself, like no one sat us down and explained the Latvian language to us. It was an immersive environment, and kids are sponges and they learn very quickly. And I think, if kids were sticking with it, and again, they have the ability to pause their lessons. No one gets the ability to pause their lessons in real life. This is amazing. And they can watch it again and again if they really want to. And after 2 months, if they stick with it, I think the progress in the fall, we'll see. If the progress is amazing, maybe they'll forget everything, but hopefully not. And I'd love to see the outcome of that for sure.
Yeah. I do want to mention also that I have a lot of sympathy for those of you who teach younger students, because I teach mostly 10 through 12, and also on Tava Klase I was teaching 12th graders, and by then the kind of joke is that the parents have kind of calmed down, or kind of given up or whatever. So I very rarely have parents coming to my conferences yelling at me about this or that, because but at that point secondary school isn't necessary at that point. They can do something else if they want. But yeah, definitely for younger students, parents are much more sensitive and involved also at that point. So, Lauren, briefly, what was your experience? Did you get some feedback as well?
I did. All of my colleagues here were really supportive, and in a way that I've come to understand is a very Latvian way, gave me very honest feedback, both positive and a lot of actually really great ideas. And that was part of the fun, that I think I got better and better as I went on, kind of listening to what people said. I also had someone, not a colleague, someone I had not met before, tell me that it's not possible to educate students that young fully in English. And I had to explain that I've never had the choice to use the target or to use the native language before, because typically in the US, there will be 20 different languages represented in my English classes. So I tried to kind of give that perspective that it's definitely possible, because frequently you don't have a choice when you have kids from all over the world learning English together. So
yeah, and
I don't know if I convinced the person, but I tried.
Well, that's okay. We can never convince everyone of anything, but that's what makes the world an interesting place. But finally, Ingrida, what was your general I don't know, experience with feedback or with constructive criticism or anything like that?
Similar to everybody else, my feedback was for the most part positive. I tried not to follow the negative feedback, just because I didn't want that really affecting me or impacting the way I was teaching. But if it was brought up, then it's like Daira said, if you're translating what you're trying to teach, the student is only going to wait for the translation. They're not going to try to pay attention to the other language. And once I explained that idea, people started following along. But other than that, I didn't really get any negative feedback. It was all positive, people encouraging, excited to learn English, excited that there's a platform where that they can go to learn English at different levels depending on where they're at.
Yeah, and that's kind of where I wanted to go next a little bit, wrapping up the kind of talking about teaching part of this episode. So, one thing that I've talked about a lot with my colleagues is the fact that although obviously, the bad outweighs the good when it comes to this coronavirus crisis that we're living in. Obviously, I don't think anybody would like to, would voluntarily like to continue this situation that we're in for much longer. But there have been, some lemonade that can be made out of lemons as well. And one thing that I have noticed is that all of us, myself and all of my colleagues, we have become kind of more clever, more creative, and more tech savvy as well. So what other kind of positives do you kind of see from this situation? You mentioned the ability for students to use this, these online lessons now and these video lessons, and be able to use them in the future as well. Have any of you had any experiences where you've either learned something new or you've done something different now because of the situation that we're in? Let's see. Maybe we can. I don't know. Does anyone have any examples?
Sure, I can start.
Okay.
Okay, Lauren. Okay. I think one of the things that made me excited about this project was just the idea of inclusivity, that there are always students for a variety of reasons who aren't able to participate in the classroom for illness or whatever issues they're facing. And I think this moment in the world has kind of made us think about ways to include people that cannot be physically present with the group. So I think that's a really exciting opportunity. And I've always taught online classes, and this experience has really made me think about how to make those connections. Like Monica was saying, it was very strange at first to be teaching without students to give you that immediate feedback, but still trying to think of a way that you can connect and make it feel more personal, even if you're not there in person with the students.
Mm-hmm. And then Daira, I think you had something to mention as well.
Sure, and absolutely. I would just like to concur with Lauren that the connection has really been something that I have worked on developing with my students. So outside of participating in the program Tava Klase, I have been teaching, of course, continuing to teach my students. And that is something that I think for me, surprisingly, we were able to not only maintain these relationships, but I think I actually developed some stronger relationships with my students. And I was one of these teachers always going to conferences and forums and sometimes leading and participating in forums and nodding. Of course, we're all in agreement. Yeah, the textbook, it's just a tool. But I really was able to, I think, move from being in agreement with that to actually making it a reality in most of my classes. And I think that the programming Tava Klase is another example of that, where, yeah, you maybe got an idea or looked at a few different ways of presenting some information, but really it was without the textbook. You bring the language to life with different activities that allow the students to go outside of the classroom and try to use that language in their day-to-day living. And so that for me has been a tremendous learning experience myself, and hopefully also one for my students.
Yeah. Well, moving on a little bit from teaching as we start to kind of wrap up this interview, one question that I'm sure all of you have been asked countless times throughout your time here in Latvia, however long it may be, is how has it been living in Latvia? What was it like adjusting? What's different from America? And I'm sure you've all heard gajillions of iterations of these questions. But what I want to ask is basically, how has it been kind of adapting to life in Latvia? I know some of you have been here for quite some time already, some of you for less time, but what was kind of challenging at the beginning? What was exciting? What was difficult? And I'm going to start with Lauren, because Lauren, you are, I think, the most recent one to come here, if I remember correctly. I might be getting it mixed up.
I just got here last summer, so fairly new. Yeah, I think one of the things I was surprised about was what an easy transition it was. I found, everyone I met here was extremely supportive and very welcoming toward my whole family. So that made it a lot easier. Like I said, the landscape looks a lot like where I came from. The weather I'm completely used to. I think it actually was a much milder winter here than it would have been back in Wisconsin. So that none of that was too hard. I think the hardest thing always is I'm used to a lot of like small talk and trying to connect with people, and that's a lot harder when you don't know the language. So I end up just kind of walking around with a goofy smile on my face, trying to make that connection with people. And I don't know if that always reads the same way, but yeah, we found it to be just a great, easy, fun city to live in Riga. And I've loved getting to see places all around the country, because that was part of my job, luckily. So I've been to Daugavpils, I've been to Liepāja, I've been to different places in the countryside and visited schools, and just been so overwhelmed by people's kindness and welcoming and wanting to share their culture. So that's been my experience.
Now, I've completely lost track of the amount of times that other people stayed in. So I'm going to just continue going clockwise on our screen, on those of you who are watching on YouTube or Facebook. So I'm going to go to Monika now. So Monika, what was your experience like beginning to kind of transition to life in Latvia?
Yeah, so similar to Lauren, I think it's interesting when you arrive here, and as an American, you're so used to smiling, and this is not a land that smiles very much. And so just, getting used to either not smiling as much or getting used to those stares, but I've kind of embraced it. Like, I've been here long enough that it's okay to feel a little bit weird, a little bit like an outsider. And that's awesome. That's what makes us unique and interesting. And I think a lot of people really struggle with that, especially growing up as a Latvian outside of Latvia, as you come here to like this magical Disneyland of a place that you've heard about your whole life and everything is perfect and wonderful. And then you arrive and you're like, oh my gosh, maybe I don't fit in here. Like you feel a little bit like a time traveler. The language that we grew up speaking is the language of the 1940s. And sometimes people give you a weird look and be like, we don't use those words anymore. Like, what are you talking about? But I mean, over time, I've learned that that's kind of like, it's what makes me interesting. And people are still excited about that. Like some people don't even know that there's a huge Latvian community in, Australia and America. And I've celebrated Yanni in Japan. Like there's Latvians all over the place. And so just it's really the land of opportunity. I mean, what other country could you walk down the street and someone stops you and puts you on TV? Like I can't think of another country that would do that. And because it's a small country, they're able to move a lot faster and be very innovative. And like I said, it's like the land of opportunity for a lot of businesses and for careers and things. And I'd really like to plug if there's other Latvian Americans or Latvian Australians or British out there without their dual citizenship, like now's the time, like get it. It's not that hard. If you have questions, put them in the comments. I don't know. Just really have that experience of living here and experiencing something that, your parents or grandparents would have loved to have you do and sort of get to know Latvia on your own terms, not just what you grew up with overseas.
Now, it's interesting that you mentioned that because we did get a question from a listener I was going to get to a tiny bit later. So they said that a Latvian woman who went through war in a displaced persons camp, et cetera, feels it isn't a good idea to seek dual citizenship for Americans. And then she followed up that question saying, is it a good idea because my daughter wants to apply? So you would say, yes, I'm guessing, Monika. What about Daira? How would you feel about this? Oh, Daira, you're muted.
Thank you. I guess I just would want to know the motivation of the person. What is their motivation for doing that? Because I think that should be something that person considers very deeply. For me, it wasn't. It was something that I knew that I wanted, and also I wanted that for my daughter. That was something very important. And being here in Latvia, it's every day. It's not lost on me when I wake up, and I'm thankful for this opportunity to put my feet on the ground that my grandparents and my parents put on when they were young children, and to work and to be a part of a positive element of society here. And I often think about my grandparents and what they would have. I mean, they could never even have imagined that Latvia would regain its independence and that a grandchild could return and be so wholly embraced and embrace life and living here. And maybe I got a little lucky as well, because where I'm living and my colleagues and my school, I could not ask for really a better place. I think it was the perfect place for me to land, so to speak, in coming to Latvia. But it has its challenges. My daughter, she was 12 when we came, and she just turned 15, and those are tough. It's a tough age. And so if it's a tough age also to be in a place where you're kind of isolated. I mean, all of her support is not here, it's across the ocean. And so there's nothing that can really be substituted for having the support and the love feeling physically around you. And so while for me, this has been a very wonderful feeling of belonging and working and making connections. It's also not something that's very easy. It's something that has its challenges too.
Mm-hmm. And Ingrida, what about for you?
So I got my dual citizenship when I was very young. My parents are the ones who took care of that. And for me personally, I'm very thankful for it. I think it's opened so many doors for me. It's the reason that I came to Latvia to study my education. There's lots more employment opportunities that are available for me because I have a dual citizenship. But I know for other people, it can be it can be a bit of a struggle for them. It really depends on what you want to do. So I agree with Daira, it depends on the person, but for the most part, I think everybody who has a dual citizenship with Latvia is very thankful for it. And if you have the opportunity, then you should just go for it.
Yeah. And what was it pretty easy for you to adapt to life here at the beginning?
Yeah, so I've been living in Latvia for 2.5 years now, and I would say overall my transition was fairly easy because I already knew the language. Many people have the language barrier and makes it difficult. And I agree with what Monika and Lauren were saying, is that Latvians aren't the most friendly people when you meet them on the street. That's maybe the biggest obstacle that I had. But because I had an experience living in Germany for a year during my bachelor's, I think that I got through a lot of those different obstacles that people here struggle with then. So I was already kind of used to the European attitude. I had the language, and it just made that transition a little easier. For me, I think what was difficult is that I moved here by myself. Lots of other people, they have family that move with them, but because I moved here by myself and I didn't know anybody here, then it was a struggle to find a group that I could fit into. Again, because Latvians aren't the most friendly people when you first meet them. It takes a little bit of work to find your little corner, find your group of friends.
Yeah, that was exactly my experience at the beginning, because my first few months were a little bit stressful and lonely, and I was spending it with my two fellow Fulbright colleagues, and then I met my first real Latvian friend, who is still, one of my best friends, and was I don't know what the exact equivalent is in English for the videos at the wedding, like the masters of ceremony, but it's different. I don't know if how many of you have been to Latvian weddings, but the traditions here, that would be a fun episode to talk about sometime, but we don't have very much time left. But anyway, I want to thank you guys so much for coming on here. And before we sign off, are there any things you would like to tell people? Any wishes you'd like to make for people who are listening and kind of going through this situation that we're all going through right now in different ways? This kind of crazy virus situation, and I don't know. Is there any final things you'd like to say? And we'll start with Ingrida this time.
I don't really know what I want to say. Maybe you can come back to me. I'll hear what somebody else has to say.
Okay, so we'll go with Lauren then. It doesn't have to be something extremely profound. Don't worry, Lauren.
I want to say thank you to this country for kind of being a safe harbor for my family during this pandemic, and for being a place where people are taking this seriously and keeping each other safe, and that we were, able to stay here with our status remaining the same, that the government said we could keep our visa status during the state of emergency, and just all those kind of extensions of protection that I've really appreciated. So thank you, Latvia.
Great. Monika?
Yes, well, so this Tava Klase experience was kind of a very nice escape. It gave us purpose. It got us out of the house. It made us feel like a little bit normal as well in this time. And I would urge people, I know a lot of people had planned to come here in the summer or, in the spring, but there are ways that you can get connected with Latvianness wherever you are, like the Dainas. Some of my projects are translating Dainas and now riddles, which is super fun. Just get connected with the culture, the music. The movies are online now. There's so many free Latvian movies online. And really just find your own purpose. Like maybe you wanted to go to Latvia to do research or to do something, and you can definitely still do that from home and to keep that culture alive. I mean, the fact that like the three of us speak Latvian, no one had been to Latvia for decades before we were able to learn and speak Latvian from our folks and schools. And so, if we can do that for, half a century, then, people can keep the culture alive wherever they are. So I would urge you to do that. Make some Latvian food tonight,
Yes, that is a very, very good idea. Daira, anything you'd like to say to people?
Sure. I guess as a closing, I would just like to say how appreciative I am for the opportunity to be here during this time. I think that the government, our leaders here are really just doing an amazing job of leading the country. I don't see that there's so much division between people in society here with what's going on. It hasn't really been politicized, and I'm really happy in a sense that we have this peaceful enclave, this place to be during this time, and to have leaders who are really showing their best foot forward and showing us a good example of how to be. And I hope that we will find the opportunities. I think that despite the fact that this is a tremendously challenging time, it's so hard for people, and financially also health issues going on. There still are opportunities to be found, and I think that in Latvia people will find those opportunities, and I wish that for people all over the world.
And finally, Ingrida. Microphone.
I want to say thank you for letting me be here. And just the way that Latvia has taken care of the COVID-19 crisis has been, I think in the news they also said that Latvia is one of the leading countries with the whole situation. And just how they've handled it, everybody, with most people being able to keep their jobs, and with Tava Klase so that people are able to learn. They've just been on top of it, and they've been doing a great job for it. And building on what Monika was saying, if you're interested in coming to Latvia, either this summer or next summer or whenever, Tava Klase also has Latvian language lessons. Like so you can learn some of the basics of the language before you come here, so you won't have that language barrier, and you'll be able to interact with everybody and have an even better time than just coming here with the English language.
Yeah, absolutely. I can definitely say that learning Latvian is difficult, but not impossible, and it's something that all of you can do. I've done it sort of competently, but I'm sure you guys can do a better job than I can as well. But thank you guys so much for being here. Thank Daira and Monika and Ingrida and Lauren one more time. It was awesome to have you and hear your experiences. Thank you to everyone who was listening today or watching, despite some of our small technical difficulties. If you enjoy this show, you can like us on Facebook. You can subscribe on your favorite podcast app or on YouTube. Otto will be back probably tomorrow with our normal episode where we talk about the news. I will be gone again on paternity leave. I am expecting my new daughter at any moment, so I do not know the next time I'll see you. So until then, everyone, Visu Labu.